Excuse me, mister, do you have the time? Are you
You
so
are currently one of the most high-profile dogma
Excuse
evangelists.
me, mister,
What got you
lend
into
me
it?
your ear.
How did I get into dogma? Well, I suppose it's a curious story, and it's one I just wrote up for the Teacher Development SIG newsletter that will hopefully be out soon. Back in 2000, I moved from the UK to Germany, and I ended up teaching at the British Council in Berlin. And one of the first teacher development, in fact, the first teacher development session I ever went to was held there in the depths of winter at the British Council, and this guy called Scott Thornbury bowled up talking about this idea of his called Teaching Unplugged, which sounded quite hip and interesting, but said nothing much else to me. So I turned up, and there was a room full of people, and we sat down, and Scott started this session with a story about a very special pair of socks that he had. I can't remember if they were possum wool or wombat wool or koala wool or something like that, but we were all fascinated, and he took us on this wonderful journey of exploring no materials, conversation-driven teaching, and I remember being struck by that experience a lot, and then I went back to my school. I was working at the Berlin School of English as well at the time, now at the Hamburg School of English, and I got talking to other teachers there and the owner of the school, and it's only really become clear over time that there was actually a long-running tradition of unplugged teaching in those schools. I remember starting my one-to-one just saying, okay, well, where's the program, the course program? They said, well, there isn't one. I said, what am I supposed to do then? They said, well, go in, start a conversation with the client, find out where they want to take it, listen to them, take notes, and then help them say what they want to say better, and then move on from there. It didn't occur to me at the time, but that's fun, a fairly rudimentary form of dogma. And the owner of the school had been doing it, has been doing it now for the last 25 years or so. So in a way, ironically enough, here I am. You've described me as a dogma evangelist, and I suppose I am. I love it. But I just ended up working for a school that had it in its blood, so to speak.
For those unfamiliar with the concept of dogma, could you in a few sentences explain the main idea of dogma in ELT?
What is dogma, actually? Well, recently it's come to be summarized quite neatly in three short statements. Teaching Unplugged, or Dogma ELT, is basically teaching in a way that is materials light, so you don't need a lot of course books or materials or technology or so on to work. You can work with the people who are in the room and the affordances that gives rise to. It should be conversation driven. That means that paper-based tasks, gap fills, lots of solo work and writing, that's not really where a dogma class is at. In a dogma class there should be an awful lot of conversation, not just talking. It's not just about speaking activities, but about conversation. Real people having real conversations about real things that matter to them, and language use arising as it is needed, and then that language has value, or that need for language has value, and the teacher can then serve it by focusing on the third aspect, which is the emergent language. So focusing on language that hasn't been pre-programmed by a syllabus or a course book choice, or what the teacher decided to do that morning. No, it should be language that arises in the moment, in that localized situation that the students need, and then taken further, riffed on, if you will. And that's what dogma teaching basically is. It's about dealing with students' real, immediate, local, personal language needs on an as and when basis, and it has to be, in that respect, the best example of just-in-time lean language provision out there.
One of the main highlights of IATEFL Brighton, for me at least, was your sparring match with Andy White. Do you still remember that?
That interview with Andy White, yeah. I'm still pretty scarred by that, I have to say. No, actually, Andy and I, we've known each other for quite some time, and I remember being interviewed with my colleague Izzy for IATEFL Harrogate. That's how we got to know each other, and that was quite a stressful experience because you're going to be watched by loads of people afterwards if you're lucky. And I considered it a really great honour and privilege to be asked back for this kind of hard talk interview. And Andy said, I'll go at it quite hard, we'll try and make it quite controversial and so on, make it interesting for the viewers. And I said, yeah, okay. And I had no idea what she was going to ask, but I suspected that she might ask about dogma and things like that. And I didn't expect it to go on for so long, and I didn't expect it to be quite so robust, as they say. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and at the end I felt like I'd been a few rounds with Tyson, and if the viewers enjoy it and find it useful, I think that's great.
Yes, I really did enjoy that. Now, Andy White brought up an interesting point there, and I'd like to bring it up again. What to you are the main factors or the main differences between the principled eclecticism approach and dogma?
Yeah, principled eclecticism. Andy did mention that during the interview, and I really regret not picking her up on it. There are some terms in ELT that people use a lot and don't necessarily define very well for themselves or for others. And sometimes more emphasis is placed on one part of these two-part terms than the other. Take teaching unplugged as an example. Everyone fixates on the unplugged aspect and sometimes overlooks the first component, maybe the primary component, which is teaching. So when people talk about teaching unplugged as being basically just having conversations and winging it, really, they forget that actually the primary element in teaching unplugged as a concept is in fact teaching. Now, going back to principled eclecticism, I remember a while back seeing a Twitter exchange. I'm now on Twitter, believe it or not. After years of thinking that all of this technology stuff is a little bit silly, I've now found myself using it quite a lot. So there we are, we get wiser as we get older. But there was a Twitter exchange where Michael Carrier sent out a tweet, something to the effect of, oh, can't we just agree on principled eclecticism and have done with it? And then Andy White, of course, asked, what's wrong with principled eclecticism? Why can't we do that? And how is it different from dogma? Good question. Well, I think that basically, to sort of finally get back to my beginning point about terms, people talk a lot about the eclecticism part of it, but very few people actually pin down the principles on which they're being eclectic. If you ask someone who says, oh, I do principled eclecticism, you say, okay, well, what are your principles? I wonder what the answer would be, honestly. What are your principles? On what are you basing your choices? Are they just beliefs, intuitions? Are they founded in any kind of research? What are they? Because principled eclecticism, at its worst, could simply be arbitrary, random choices based on whatever I feel like. And that's not pedagogically any more sound than any other method or approach. So principled eclecticism sounds very attractive, sounds very flexible and so on and so forth, but it may just be a big vacuous nothing, and that's a concern I have about it. Dogma ELT, Teaching Unplugged, has also been criticised for being, vacuous and a big abstract nothing. But at least it has some very clear principles, and it can trace its lineage through a history of educational movements. So from that point of view, I think dogma isn't actually principled eclecticism. It's not the same thing. And I think it has one up on at least the common sense of principled eclecticism in having very clear principles. And so that's where I'd say the difference lies, just to be controversial for a minute, which is unlike me.
I shall leave our viewers to comment on that. Tell me, do you encourage your CELTA students to teach using dogma?